Welcome to this presentation of the Solomon Manufacturing Solution. During this presentation, I'll be giving you a high-level look at each of the manufacturing modules while pointing out as much of the functionality as possible within our limited time. My goal is to show you why we think Solomon is especially well suited for the small to mid-sized manufacturer, and to leave you interested enough that you'll want to drill down to more detail at a later time. Here's what we'll be going through. First, a high-level description of the main areas of functionality within each module. Then we'll launch into a limited demonstration of each module. I've constructed a scenario that has previously generated demand from multiple sources for an assembly item. We'll first take a peek at that demand, and then we'll plan on fulfilling it by creating a work order. In support of creating that work order, we'll take a look at the bill of materials module, along with a routing that will be used by shop floor control. After we've opened the work order, we'll use dispatch control in shop floor to schedule it and release it. Then we'll use data collection to perform a step completion, and production completion back in the work order module to report the items complete. So let's take a look at each module's main areas of functionality. The first module is Bill of Materials. It's a core Solomon module that was enhanced by Sandler to support shop floor control for the new version of Solomon. This is where the product structures are defined, along with the routings that describe the manufacturing process. Another area of functionality within the Bill of Materials module is the ability to do a standard cost roll-up that examines the multi-level nature of the product structures and the related routings. For manufacturers that don't need to track work in process and they don't need to have visibility of inventory demand, there's a production entry function that is provided that lets you do basically a multi-level backflush using the product structures and routing, so that a small manufacturer can say, I built X number of these things, now go ahead and do the transaction that puts that finished good into inventory and does stock withdrawals on all the components. There are also mass change functions within the module, as well as where used, and an explorer type multi-level explosion. We'll be taking a look at those in just a few moments. The second module in the series is the work order module, which is also a core Solomon module. It was written originally by Sandler and is maintained by Sandler. It uses bills of material or inventory kits. So for companies that don't need to use bill of materials, where they have a simple flat bill, an inventory kit can be referenced for the creation of the work order, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Routings are pulled over from the bill of material module and then subsequently used by shop floor control if that module is installed. One of the areas of functionality that's significant as well in work order is the ability to define multiple production targets. So you can have a work order that produces quantities of finished good to be sent to multiple destinations, and we'll see that illustration. Work order is designed by nature to track work in process. So for those companies that need to be monitoring how they're doing in the manufacturing process from a cost standpoint as they're going along the way, work order fills that bill. It can handle standard or actual cost at the component and production item level. So if the item is being built is a standard costed item, then when production completion is reported, the appropriate variance will be booked, but the work order will have retained the actual cost to manufacture. Work order is fully lot serial enabled, so we'll be tracking, work order will track the serial and lot identifiers for components that are consumed, as well as the production items. And because of the fact that work order is actually built on the infrastructure of the project series, although you wouldn't recognize that when you look at it because it's not in your face, all the tools that are available that work with a project series can work with a work order as well. The next module in the series is Shop Floor Control, which is a Sandler Con module. It is written to extend the functionality of bill of materials and work order. In fact, those are prerequisite modules. There are several areas of functionality within shop floor. Graphical scheduling is the first, where we can accommodate both forward and backward scheduling, complete with simulations. We also have drag and drop micro scheduling capability within it. The next area is capacity planning, which is built on an infinite loading model, where we can define the capacity of work centers in the shop floor on a daily basis, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Dispatching is the functionality that allows you to apply actions in mass to many work orders, including releasing them to the shop floor. Data collection, out of the box, the shop floor module has a screen-oriented data collection, which is designed to be working on a workstation out on the shop floor, where an employee walks up and identifies themselves and keys in information about the job they're working on. There's also a barcoding interface from Gulfstream using their barcode gateway that will allow you to collect shop floor data, tracking a job around from work center to work center as it follows through its routing. There's also integration with Kronos timekeeping system. So for those companies that are using the Kronos system already, we can accommodate that, collecting data from there and feeding it through the shop floor system. Count point back flushing is also supported as part of the step completion operation. Also known as pay point back flushing, this feature provides for the ability to back flush materials and or labor and machine costs as a result of reporting a step completion. This is very useful as a standard feature in some environments. In others, when you're getting started, the company may not be ready to be collecting actual labor costs at on the shop floor. Until they are ready, they can be collecting the standard costs that are applied against the work order as part of the step completion process. The fourth module in the series is Project Work Order, which is also a Sandler Con module. It is designed for project-oriented manufacturers if you're talking about fitting it in the manufacturing environment. Those folks that are building larger scale, more expensive pieces of equipment where they want to use project management techniques to be managing that project. Enabling a project as a project work order allows you to define the demand for inventory at the task level and link that demand up with supply that is being provided by a Solomon work order. So that's a very nice fit in that particular environment. It's also a nice fit in job shops where they're not identifying a particular part that they're producing, but it's just a job that they're running. In the non-manufacturing project-oriented environment, anybody that is running their business based on projects and needs better control over inventory and or work in process, project work order is also a fit there, even though they may not be in the manufacturing environment. So project work order is extending the core project series. As I mentioned, it's enabling Solomon projects to plan for and control inventory, and it provides for functionality for longer term, larger scale projects and WIP tracking. Some other third-party applications that work with the Solomon manufacturing solution include MRP, DRP functionality from MaxQ Technologies. As I mentioned, the Gulfstream barcode gateway from Gulfstream. MBS Consulting out of Delaware has a purchase order requisitions module that works with project work order and work order, and a light rules-based configurator from Newport Consulting. So now let's get into our demonstration. Let's take a look at the bill of material module. We'll run the bill of material maintenance program and load in the crank assembly that we're going to be building here for our illustration. We're presented with a grid that displays the components that are going to be included in a standard build for the crank assembly. Down here on the grid, if I highlight one of these items and I double click it, it'll switch to form view. That's a standard Solomon convention for those of you not familiar with Solomon. So we can see some of the information that's being tracked, like the engineered quantity adjusted by the standard, by the scrap percent to generate a standard quantity that's then used by work order in defining the component requirements for a work order or by production entry. We have engineering change control for effectivity dating. Switch back to grid view here. And we have some things such as we can identify the material requirement with a given routing step. That becomes important when shop floor control is doing some scheduling, so we can get some just-in-time inventory planning. Engineering change control lets us specify the effectivity dating information at the assembly level. Standard costs gives us a view of the rolled up standard costs broken down by the various cost buckets. We can take a look at the current and pending setup and runtime costs from here. A shortage check is just a quick way for us to say I want to build X number of these crank assemblies. Do I have enough components on hand to do that? And change status is a way for us to manually change the status of this assembly as opposed to using the effectivity dating. From here we can also drill down and look at the view structure. We'll do that for a higher level assembly so that we can see the multi-level view. We can do copy bombs and kits, and we can view the routing that's related to this. Let's jump out to the routing screen for this and bring up the routing. Again, we have a common or a familiar view here. We're presented with a grid for the routing steps. If I switch this to form view, you can see the kinds of information that we're tracking for each routing step. You can use as little or as much of this information as you want, depending on what your needs are. Some folks won't even use the routing piece, they'll just use the bill of materials piece. Obviously those that are going to want to get into shop floor control will be using routings, and then this information becomes very important. Some things to point out here are, if I switch and move over here to the right so we can see, we have a current standard yield at each one of these steps. This gets computed as a cumulative yield rating to help us with our planning. When shop floor does the scheduling, it will utilize this to generate adjusted material component requirements for subsequent steps. Okay, and again we can look at the standard costs for setup and runtime for the routing here, for the current as well as the pending. So we'll close this now. And let's, okay, these programs are in support of this module. I don't have time for that at the moment. We'll go into bill of material structure so we can get a little taste of this. Go into the Retro 24, which is a bicycle, and we can see a multi-level Explorer view here where we can see an explosion and drill down into the levels that we wish. This is the crank assembly, of course, that we're going to be using for our illustration. On the right hand side we see information that changes depending on what we've selected on the left hand side. Here we're looking at bill of material information since we're at the top level. Then we can look at inventory information about this, as well as item site and quantity information for the selected item. If I pick a component down here, we'll get information about the component as well as the inventory and item site information. We can get a consolidated component list here. We have a component where used functionality. Most of you know what that is. Apply effective date revisions as part of our effectivity dating so that we can turn pending items active and active items obsolete. And that's applied to not only components but to can be applied to routing steps and work centers and labor classes and any number of different things. Mass component maintenance allows us to do a module-wide search and replace kinds of operations. These functions down here in support of the standard costing functions. Update pending costs and rates lets us manipulate all those cost components for a pending cost set. Compute cost rollup does a cost analysis and rollup to determine what the new standard cost for an item is going to be, and then update standard cost from pending will actually update the current standard cost, and will also book an entry in the general ledger if necessary, if the item is valued at standard and there are quantities that need to be revalued. So that's a very quick overview of the bill of material module. Now let's move on to the work order module. Okay, let's call up a work order that I've created to already build this crank assembly that we've already taken a look at the structure and the routing for. I'm going to discuss these details in just a bit. But when I created this work order, all I did was identify the part, the site that I'm pulling the definition from. It found a bill of material. It found a routing, so it automatically went out and created a material list and a routing for this particular work order. Brought all this stuff in automatically, recalculated the material requirements based on the quantity that I'm building, extended by the scrap percentages, etc. I can manipulate this list. I could just add new parts in here if I wish. I can also use this kit bomb button where I can identify an inventory kit or any other bill of material if I wish, and create enough parts to put in here. Based on that, just as a data entry speed up mechanism. I'll just delete this. We can manipulate this list as we see fit. This is a component list that's unique to this particular work order. We've just used the bill of materials and kits as optional templates to create this information. While we're in here, let's just take a look at some of the information. I switched to form view, and you can see for each component we're tracking quite a bit of information. The pertinent pieces of information are: what is it that I'm building, where am I planning to pull it from, what's the quantity that's required, and when am I going to require it, this date over here. That's very important for just-in-time planning, as we'll see in the planned inventory position report. As we move along in the work order will take care of tracking the quantities that have been issued into the work order, what's been pulled out as a result of scrap or transfers back to inventory, or robbing parts from this work order to pay another work order, or what have you, all those things that happen in manufacturing. And the quantity details form will then give you an audit of all of those things that have happened. You'll see the batch that was involved. If there are lot serial numbers involved, you see the lot serial numbers for this. So you can see there's quite a bit of information that's being tracked at the transaction level. Okay, let's close this up. And we'll just take a quick look at the routing, and we'll see that we used the routing. This should look familiar. This routing came over from the standard routing. Again, was manipulated for this particular work order depending on the quantities there, and we can adjust these things. This information is extended significantly when shop floor control is brought into the picture. Now, this is a very important area here, this targets. I mentioned before that I had previously created some demand in the system so that we can build this work order to fulfill that demand. And what I did was I created a manufacturing work order that was building a bicycle that needed 30 of these Retro 24, or 30 of these crank assemblies. I created a sales order and then generated a request from the sales order for the shop to build something for that. And if I switch to form view here, I can look at information about it. I can see it's for this particular sales order and this line number, and that the pick date for that sales order is this. So we can see we're planning on having this work order finished by May 2nd, so we're okay. And then also we have a third item of demand here, a project work order. A task on a project work order, I look down here, I can see this task on this particular project work order is going to require these 20 units. And we'll talk about project work orders in just a little bit. Now, the ability of work order to designate multiple targets for its production adds quite a bit of flexibility in terms of market fit. Some examples of this would be you may have a company that chooses to accumulate their demand and sales orders before they open a work order to actually start production. In that particular case, you'd use this work order requests button, where when you click this, you'd see all the requests from order management in terms of what sales orders are requesting this particular item to be built. You could click on select multiples of them, bring them back here, and they'd all populate into the target here. When the work order is completed, then the production for each one of these goes back to the sales order, to each of the respective sales orders, and the revenue from those sales orders comes back to this work order, so we can see what kind of profitability picture we have on this work order for all of those sales orders. Of course, you could always choose to do that for a single sales order if you wish. Some other examples of being able to use this target grid include fabrication shops, where there's a special feature in work order that allows you to build unlike items. So we can use that for product families, for example, where you have a work order that's producing different inventory parts that are go through a similar manufacturing process, have a similar end cost, but they vary in terms of the materials. So, for example, cutting orders in fabrication shops or textile shops, etc., things of that nature. You can use that to provide that kind of a capability. Now, some of the other information about the work order, we can look at the quantity summary tab. So as we're progressing through the life of the work order, we can track information about that. We're able to monitor the costs as we go along, so we'll track the actual costs. If we've done partial completions, what's actually left in work in process? What's the value? What would the value be at the original standard cost, or the standard cost at last completion, or based on the current standard cost, as well as comparing the last, average, and estimated cost of all these things. So we can use this information to monitor how we're doing on the work order. Bill of material information we pull from the bill of material module in terms of what revision number is currently active. And then if shop floor control is installed, this tab becomes enabled. If it's not installed, it's here and it's simply disabled. We'll discuss what some of these things are when we take a look at shop floor control. But actually, let me just make note that we can choose to backflush material and labor by work order. These are defaults from the shop floor module level. We can backward schedule, forward schedule, so we're able to override these things at the work order level. Then there's some other information that's being tracked on this particular work order. So from here, by the way, we can drill down to a more detailed cost analysis once we've released the work order, so we can take a look at the details of costs that have gone in. If I want to take a look at the inventory status inquiry for this particular part, actually let's do that. I'll just jump down here to inventory status inquiry. We're now looking at the inventory status. Switch this to form view, and we can see here's our what is available, and this is in a non-time phased fashion, where we started with on hand, adjusted it for planned incoming supply, and adjusted it down for planned outgoing demand. And if we need to get details about this information, I see here, for example, on firmed work orders or released work orders. I can drill down to the work orders subscreen and get details about that, down to the order management documents. If I want to see costs and what serial numbers, if it was a serialized item, all that stuff is at your fingertips here. An availability button so that we can actually do some ATP calculations. Okay, so now we will just close work order entry, and I'll say I'm going to save my changes here. And now what we're just while we're in here to discuss some of the other things that are available, these are various inquiry tools that are available within work order. We can do a separate material issues program. So for the smaller shop, we're able to create the work order with work order entry, and then from within that work order, if we choose, we can go ahead and actually issue the materials to the work order. As the shop gets bigger and they need more security control, and they have an inventory cage and somebody that's responsible for picking and issuing materials, this separate program works identically to the issuing process in work order entry, but it's under separate security control. Returns and transfers allows us to transfer materials back to stock, scrap it to other work orders, etc., as well as being able to inform inventory that we need or do not need that inventory reallocated to the work order in case it was returned and wasn't needed, or if it was borrowed for something else and we still need it back. Production completion we'll get into in a bit. This is where we actually report the completion of the work order and indicate that the items that we're making are placed where they needed to go. We're able to pull external costs from anywhere in the Solomon system, and then support some various support capabilities here. Okay, now that we've created the work order, let's get out to shop floor control, where we can actually schedule and release the work order. Okay, now let's show you how we schedule and release the work order in shop floor control. We load up the dispatch control application. I'm going to switch this to full screen, and we have our default view that comes up that's settable by employee. Refresh the screen, and now let's talk about what we're looking at here. Left side of the screen are all of the work orders that have met the filter criteria that we set up for this particular view. Look at the view details and we'll describe this a little bit. First off, on the left hand side, this Explorer order is what controls how this information is displayed to us in the dispatch selection. So if I, for example, wanted to say, you know what, let me take a look at my work orders grouped by part to build and then by work order. I could simply click OK here, refresh the selection, and now it's regrouped this so I can take a look at the work orders that are building each of these particular parts. Okay. Now this can get pretty deep. So for example, maybe I want to go by priority first, and then I want to go by the customer, and then by sales order, and then by work order within that. So I can arrange those various things. Now what happens is on the filter side, when we set these filters up, we can then further screen the work orders that are included. As you can see, I have a filter set up here that I only want to look at the work orders that meet this criteria, that is a starting date of 3/24 through 4/30. On the routing tab, we're able to set these filters. So for example, if we had an outside vendor call up and say, our main plating machine is down for the next 3 days unexpectedly, we're not going to be able to deliver on time. I want to see how that's going to affect us. So I could set that vendor ID in here, and any work orders that have a routing step that's going outside to this particular vendor will be included in the criteria, in the selection. Material list, perhaps we want to take a look at, we're getting ready to release all the firm work orders for the next week, and I want to see which ones have an on-hand component shortage so I can see what I have to expedite. We can set that up here. Alright, so let me go back, and incidentally we can save these views under any other names. So we can create these views as a public, a shared, or a private view. So I'll, for example, bring up, here's a view by customer. I don't want to save the changes I made to the current view that I was in. I refresh. Now this goes out and it gathers up all of the work orders, since I didn't set any other criteria in terms of what I wanted to select. And I can see this one was arranged by customer, and then by priority within customer, and then by work order. So we can see that that's how this is set up. Let's go back to our original now. Refresh this. This is the work order that we were just created. If I double click here, we'll go out and you'll see that this will change. We'll jump out to where this work order begins. I go out here now. One of the things, what are we looking at here? Across the top, we're looking at the calendar. So we have the days of the week. If I look over here, I can see this is a weekend where I've defined in my capacity planning that we don't work on Saturdays and Sundays. On the left-hand side, in the dark gray, represent the work centers. Within the work centers are the valid operations. We can control this presentation order. It's not alphabetical, as you can see. This first one is always the outside operations. Now, if I want to see what these colors mean, I can click on the legend here and bring up this legend. This is settable at the module level, so for each particular installation you can change the meaning of what these are. A couple things to point out here. We'll see a work center that's overloaded is represented in red. Work orders, when we click on a work order and select it, we outline it in white. As you can see, the difference over here, this is outlined in black, these are outlined in white. That means that the work order we've selected has routing steps here. Also, if the work order is late, you'll see it represented with vertical lines. And if it's probably late, meaning that we're running late but we still have time to recover if we expedite, you'll see it represented as a thick thatch. So if I go back here, for example, I think, yeah, here's where we have a capacity problem. Now, when I hover over each of these blocks, the first block here for a work center represents the capacity for that work center on that day. And we can see we have 8 hours of capacity. This next block is the aggregate load. That is the load for all operations in that work center for that day, and we can see it is represented here. We have an overload condition from 2 work orders, so we can do something about that. If I want to drill down to what the details are, I can see that in the assembly, in the operation step. Now, if we go over and we look at our particular work order, we can see it's represented here. We see work order 104 as an outside processing step, work order 104 down here in the assembly operation. Now, if I want to look at some more information about that work order, I click on the work order tab, and we'll see here that this is the work order that we had set up. Remember, we had that set up for building to a manufacturing work order, a sales order, and a project work order. I can see this first line is being built to line 5 of work order 103. This one is being built to customer C300, sales order 5145, line 1, and its scheduled pick date was, let me switch to form view here, scheduled pick date was 5/7. Okay. If we want to look at the routing for this work order, we can see the routing steps here. What kind of an operation it is, when it's planned to start, and when it's planned to be completed. Each one of these. That's just because I've already scheduled this particular work order. So if I switch this to form view, you can see we're we'll capture actual start and stop times, when it's estimated to be complete, how many hours, and what the yield quantity is. If it's an outside processing step, as this one is, we'll see this represented on the outside tab. If I switch to form view here again, we see that this is linked to a purchase order. I can look at purchase order information here. From here I can actually go down to the purchase order entry. If I've entered the email address in here and I needed to communicate with a vendor, say I wanted to expedite a work order, I've done a simulation, I know I can do it in my shop, but I have to find out if my outside vendor can accommodate. Simply click that and it'll launch our email client, and we can go back and determine whether we can meet our goals. Okay, now that I've used my filters to select the work orders that I want to work with, I can further select or unselect to get a smaller subset. I'll clear all these, and I'm only going to select this work order, and any of the ones that are selected here we can mass apply actions to. So I've selected this one, we go into the actions, and these actions are I can dispatch by changing the processing stage. That's one of the things we're going to do, and I can schedule. I've already scheduled this one, but we could reschedule it. I can forward, change things to override. I can forward schedule and backward schedule, and I can slide out for a specific date, or I can adjust by a number of days and do that sort of thing. What we're going to do is simply go ahead and and release this particular work order. I could do this as a simulation, but we're going to actually commit it to the shop, and while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and print the shop papers. Click Begin Processing indicates how many work orders I'm going to be processing against. It just updated the inventory plan because we've moved from the plan processing stage to released, so that we can record that we have demand and supply tied to a released work order. Now it goes ahead and it prints the shop papers. We'll go out here and pick those up so we can see. Drill down to this. We have a cover sheet, we have the picking list, and we have the routing that can be used out on the shop floor for data collection. Now when I close the action screen, we'll update the dispatch selection, and we'll see here that this work order is now in the released stage. Now if I wanted to reschedule, let's go ahead and refresh the selection, select everything in here. We'll jump out to this particular work order again. If I wanted to micro-schedule this particular work order, let's say, for example, let's assume we had an overcapacity problem here with the Drill 1 work center. We don't, but let's pretend that we did. One of the things that I could do, I could certainly go through and schedule the whole work order, or I can go into micro-schedule, click this, bring up another screen, and I can see that I've got my work order represented in this screen. What I can do is slide the entire work order forward or backward. I can slide a particular step forward or backward. Or let's say we had this capacity problem, and what I want to do is work on it on the same day, but I know I have an alternate work center. So I'll click on the Allow Work Center change, and we now bring up all the work centers that are available to us, and I can simply click and drag this down to the secondary work center, and it now shows up in Drill Center 2. We can go ahead and save that to the schedule, and off we go. That change, by the way, would show up in here either in a simulation or once we've committed it to the schedule. Okay, let's take a quick peek at data collection, which is comprised of two applications here. Data review and release is designed to be run as an automatic application, or it can be processed manually. When this is running automatically, it's polling for transactions entered by employee based on criteria that are set by employee in terms of frequency and interval and things of that nature. For this illustration, we'll just use the manual release here. When I refresh the grid, we'd come up with any transactions that are in here that are eligible. Well, we don't have any just yet, and we're going to go do that now. We'll go out to the data collection program here. This is the screen-oriented data collection program I mentioned before. There's a lot here, but we'll just pick a couple things here. I'll take an employee, key them in. This is an employee that's walked up to a terminal on the shop floor to key in their information. Now, I indicate the work order that I'm working on. It senses what the next routing step is, but I'm going to go in here and actually override this, go right to the last routing step. Tells us that it's not the next routing step. We're going to say OK. We have the ability to retroactively backflush the costs of materials at the prior routing steps. So that's what we're going to illustrate here. We've indicated that it's complete. There's other routing steps that haven't been complete. It's just warning us. We're saying that's OK. I click Enter, and it now goes down in here into a grid for acceptance. I go ahead and complete this. Once I've completed it, it's eligible for the data review and release program to pick it up and process it. Now this is an interface point. This is important to note. When we integrate with Gulfstream's Barcode Gateway and with Kronos, those external systems are dumping their transactions into a shop queue that we pick up and process and make sure it's in the right format here, and then we pick it up with the data review and release program and process that. So we logged out of the data collection, close that screen, and now when we go ahead and refresh this, we have a transaction that's eligible for processing. We go ahead and release it. And what it's doing now is it's going and it's looking at each of those steps that were flagged for backflushing, looks at any materials that haven't been issued yet, backflushes the remaining materials, backflushes any standard labor that we had set up, applies any overhead for work centers and labor based on those things. Again, we could have any combination of things that are going on, and the data review and release program will pick it up. Now this is actually applied costs to the work order now, so if we go and take a look in the work order, we'll bring up work order inquiry here very quickly. And we're not going to include projects or project work orders in the lookup. We just go back down here to the last work order, bring this up and expand it, and we now see that we have some actual costs on the work order. We must not have applied any labor on that particular thing. Now that we've said that that work order is completed, we'll go back here to the work order module and we'll do our production completion. Bring this screen up and call up our work order. If no changes are in place, it remembered all of our settings here. All we need to do is click begin processing, and what this now does is we're going to say no, we won't change that to ops closed. It now goes through each of these targets and processes them. It's been accumulating costs in work in process synchronized with the general ledger, all the costs collected on the work order, and now what it's doing is going through each of these targets, applying those WIP costs to those completed items and putting them where they're supposed to go. In the case of the sales order, the item was completed and put into a special holding area where process manager picks that up in order management and will go ahead and ship it out and drive the revenue back to the work order. In this, one of the things we'll look at now also is this project work order X14, and we'll show you where that completed production went. So we'll go out here to project work order. Oops. Bring up the project work order entry screen, and we'll call up the project work order X14. And you may have noticed that it went to task 0401. Well, if I drill down and I take a look at the material requirements and issues screen, the crank assembly is what we needed. I'm going to switch to form view. Notice that we needed 20. There's nothing remaining because 20 came in. Where did that come from? I go down to quantity details. I see it was auto issued from child work orders. There's the batch number, and we can see that it came in from work order 104. Now that we're in this screen, let me talk just a little bit about what project work order is. The differentiation between project work order and Solomon's manufacturing work order is this. The Solomon work order exists to make an inventory item. You noticed that when we were demonstrating that we start by identifying what's the item that we're going to make, and then we have targets set up to indicate where are we putting the completed production when we're finished with it. A project work order is a project that's been enabled to allow you to go down to the task level and define the inventory requirements and control for inventory as we just illustrated. There is no production completion process. It's not building an inventory part, even though this work order, this project work order, is set up to build a big expensive machine. The emphasis is on the project management aspect of building this machine. So, as with a Solomon work order, a project work order is actually a kind of project under the covers. So, any of the tools that are available to work with the project series will work with both a Solomon work order and a project work order. Since I forgot to show you how the inventory is planned for and brought together in the planned inventory position report, let's go into this task, and I'm going to change this. Oh, we already have something out here. This is set for 6:15. So I'm going to go run the planned inventory position report, which brings all this stuff together. And I'm going to select a template, which incidentally, for those of you who are not familiar with Solomon, is a system-wide convention here. And I'm going to select this particular part. Well, actually, anything that begins with this. I'm going to include plan work orders, and I'm going to set my planning horizon out here to June 30th, and we'll go ahead and preview this. What this is doing is it picked the parts that I selected in my criteria, and it goes out and runs this projected on-hand inventory balance report out through the planning horizon that I specified. So we can see here where we see here's our material requirement for XXO2 on 615 for 10 units. That's a demand. Let me go up here. We can see it's a planned withdrawal. We have planned additions in here, and what the end result of this is we have this planned inventory position of this number of units that's being adjusted by planned additions and withdrawals on a date-specific basis. So some folks have referred to this as a little mini MRP report, but this winds up being very useful when it comes to planning for purchases and other procurements. There's an option in here to specify show item shortages only, so you're only dealing with that particular aspect of things. That report, incidentally, brings all planned withdrawals and all planned additions, all supply and demand, system-wide, including project work orders and manufacturing work orders. So the main areas of functionality in project work order are the ability to plan for inventory and control inventory in the same fashion that you can with a manufacturing work order, but at the task-by-task level. It's a project work order isn't building an inventory item per se, although if the requirement is to be able to put this big expensive machine into inventory in as an inventory item and have it shipped out using order management with all its shipping capabilities, that's easily accommodated by simply booking an inventory receipt with proper offsets. Another aspect is in WIP tracking, where we're able to automatically collect costs on a project work order into work in process, fully synchronized with the general ledger, and then where WIP is relieved in a manufacturing work order through the production completion process, WIP is relieved in a project work order through our WIP relief process that has a bunch of different options available to it, including being able to be tied to revenue recognition, relieve WIP at the project level, at the task level, etc. You can take a look at another desktop movie on project work order entry specifically on our website. So to wrap up, what did we see? Well, we saw that we can start out simple. So Solomon Manufacturing is aimed squarely at the small to mid-sized manufacturers. Start off with bill of materials with a simple backflush operation, or you can use work order by itself without bill of materials using inventory kits, and then use only the basic functionality of each of those. And as the requirements increase, we can extend the capability as desired using the additional features of each module, such as using work order in conjunction with bill of materials, work order to build to stock, build to order using order management, engineer to order using project work order. Then we can add shop floor into the mix when requirements become more involved, or we can do scheduling both forward and backward, where we can do data collection at the routing step level and use capacity planning. And then project work order fitting nicely with the project-based manufacturers, as well as with any non-manufacturing company that needs better control over inventory when they're managing their business based on projects. I hope I've succeeded in piquing your interest in Solomon Manufacturing. Some additional resources for you are upcoming MBS training workshops on Solomon Bill of Materials and work order. The schedule can be found through PartnerSource, and I will be the instructor for both of those classes, as well as upcoming webinars through MBS events, Microsoft On Stage, where you'll find more webinars on Solomon, as well as Exapta, Navision, and Great Plains. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Melissa Pollock at this email address, and certainly feel free to contact me at the address here as well. Thank you for your time.